new front, Israel versus Iran, and the echoes of empire. Friday the 13th has always had a dark aura in Western lore. But for the people of Iran, this one was a literal nightmare. Israeli warplanes began pounding Iranian military targets, igniting what some fear could spiral into a region wide or even global conflict. For decades, Iran has been cast as a rogue state by the West, a nuclear boogeyman in waiting. But the reality on the ground tells a different story. Tehran's military is outdated, constrained by decades of sanctions. Their air force, a fleet of aging American planes from before the Islamic Revolution. Meanwhile, Israel is among the most advanced in the world, bolstered by cutting edge US tech and an undisclosed nuclear arsenal. Now, after years of shadow conflict, the bombs are no longer just whispers in the night. They're lighting up the skies over both countries. Is this the opening act of World War III? Is the U.S., under the returning shadow of Donald Trump, positioned to de escalate or escalate this crisis? Will the man who branded himself the master of deals finally broker peace, or will he let Israel continue to play the abusive partner who unleashes violence only to blame the victim, muttering, "Look what you made me do"? Here to discuss this with me is my man in the middle of all the geopolitical nonsense, Deep State Cooper.
Shalom and or salam, people.
How are you this evening day?
Evening day is about right. The empties should tell the whole story. I'm in my comfort and emotional security bunker, trying to keep out the bad news. But I have to say, I think that Israelis may have emotional safety bunker busting technology.
Now, is anyone where you are talking about this as an unprovoked attack? Russia attacking the Ukraine was "quote unquote" unprovoked in Western media. This is a preemptive strike by Benjamin Netanyahu, but Iran has been the preemptive bad guy, it feels like, for decades.
Well, in Europe, across all of Europe, as in the United States, you have a sharp division between the transatlantic sort of legacy elite and the more popular media outlets, um, and the kind of voice of the Euro street that comes out through social media and activism.
Mm-hmm.
So you do have a very strong pro-Palestinian movement all across Europe. Pro-Palestinian demonstrations are really a weekly affair in most major European countries. Even smaller cities will have some rallies, yes. And pro-Palestinian graffiti is commonplace.
Okay.
Enough so that it's basically trivial, right? And as a result, there are a lot of people who see this as another example of unilateral Israeli escalation and aggression against a country which might not be the democratic poster child of the Middle East or the miscongeniality in the UN human rights pageant, but nonetheless did nothing to provoke this. Even their previous responses to Israeli attacks have been relatively measured and muted, compared even to the expectations of Western analysts. So it's hard to find anyone with outside of official government outlets, world national leaders, that takes even the relatively tame line of, well, Israel has a right to defend itself, right? No elaboration. But that is the official line coming out of Germany, coming out of France, coming out of Canada as well, that this is somehow connected through the alleged nuclear weapons program in Iran. The Iranians deny that they're interested in nuclear weapons technology. There are international observers, including UN agencies, that say that there is no active Iranian weapons program. So take that as you will, right? According to Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel has been months, not years, away from a nuclear bomb for the last 15 years, and somehow they never get one. So I wouldn't necessarily take the Israelis at their word on this. And just to clarify, what Netanyahu claims, you correctly described his claim that this was a preemptive strike. And preemptive strikes, which are a type of first strike, are legal according to the quaint norms of the Geneva Convention and international law. But there are certain requirements. You can't just sucker punch your neighbor because you feel like it. If there's a demonstrable concentration of forces, mobilization, if you hit them because they are obviously and clearly preparing to hit you, that's preemptive, and that is legal. Preventative strikes, I think that this is what would be described as a preventative strike, which are not legal. And that category didn't even exist until George W. Bush invented it to justify the Iraq War. That's a strike which hits target a rival country, in his case, Iraq, in order to eliminate the potential down the road of one day there being aggression. And again, although that was presented by George W. Bush and American officialdom as a justification, not actually legal according to international law. According to international law, that's just aggression. That's starting a war, right? There's no justification for it.
Donald Trump was questioned on his plane, and he talks as if this is just a real estate deal or maybe one of his many failed business transactions. There was a deal on the table. They didn't take the deal. We had a deal. It was a great deal. It was a very good deal. It was packaged nicely.
It was the greatest deal.
It was the greatest deal.
It was a 10, like my daughter Ivanka, like the greatest. You could totally take that deal to Epstein Island. Even Epstein wouldn't turn down that deal when it turned 16.
But I have a serious question for you, and I don't want to make this too much about Donald Trump. But he does not want a war on his hands because he knows that you can't really wash that off. And this presidency has been, in my opinion, a pretty massive failure for him. He's gotten some things done that he wanted to do. His relationship with Musk has been severed. The pushback on these ICE raids, to me, is worse than kids in cages. I don't know if you would agree with that. There's really nothing, even his own base is really supporting. Where are all the jobs? And eggs are still expensive in your country. Is this the one thing he could do? Is he going to try to broker some sort of peace deal?
So I think that he may have been talked into greenlighting this strike with the argument that, look, the Iranians are being intransigent. They're not agreeing to the terms that you have so generously bestowed on them. We need to teach them a lesson, like a short, sharp hit, right? Like hitting a dog on the nose with a rolled up newspaper. Will teach them their place and assert that you're the alpha, you're the guy. I think that that's an argument which would naturally appeal to him. I think it's also an argument that's simple and aggressive enough for it to make sense to him, which is an important consideration. And the Israelis know him well enough to pitch that kind of manipulation. So I think that he may believe that the road to peace goes through bombed out Iran. I don't think that's the case. I think that the Iranians are going to, it's possible that he'll be able to secure some kind of truce because they have been reeling. It's not just these recent attacks, but Hezbollah and Hamas were extremely valuable proxies of theirs. Hezbollah has been wiped out. They lost Assad as well, their key ally in the region. So what they have is basically the largest minority stake in Iraq and the Houthis. That's who's left on in the axis of resistance, so-called. Now, the core infrastructure in Iran has just been shredded, the top cut off. So they could use a breather. But Trump has demonstrated that the United States is, to borrow a Russian term, agreement incapable. Even if you sign a deal, even if you do a deal with the United States, like they did with Obama, then there's no rational expectation that they'll hold on to it, right? Any deal with the United States is immediately meaningless. So you have to prepare for them to break the next deal, which means that you have to anticipate that at some point it'll be a shooting war. The United States will need to be cut down. I'm not saying that's desirable. I'm saying that that's a very rational interpretation of recent events from the perspective of American adversaries. What's also true is that I think that it'll be obvious to the remaining Iranian leadership that the only path towards national security is through the development of nuclear weapons. Right? The countries that the United States has not attempted to regime change and decapitate in this way, well, North Korea is the poster boy for the useful benefits of proliferation. Similarly, Pakistan has been a trouble spot in a very strategic region of the sort of crossroads between South Asia and the Middle East, gateway to Afghanistan. There's all kinds of American meddling, but it's never been regime changed. And likewise, that may have to do with the fact that they also have a nuclear arsenal. Now, when it comes to Trump's calculations, in a way, I think that he's kind of in a no-lose situation with this escalation. If it works like the Israelis promised, and he manages to cow Iran to such an extent that they're forced to sign some kind of deal that allows Trump to claim victory, well, then he's brought peace to the Middle East through a victorious war. Nothing better if you're an American president. If that doesn't happen, and the Iranians instead retaliate, and don't just retaliate against Israel, but strike American targets, either as their own form of retaliation. After all, despite even the official statements issued by Trump have been very confused about whether or not the United States participated in this strike, to what extent they participated in the strike, whether they approved the strike, whether the negotiations that were ongoing when the strike happened. And remember, one of the leadership figures killed through targeted bombings was the actual lead negotiator on the Iranian side. So you're killing the people you're talking to. That there's some indication that Trump knew that this was coming and that the negotiations were a bad faith effort. to get the Iranians to underestimate the likelihood of an immediate strike. So it would not be outlandish for the Iranians to treat the United States as a party to the attacks and to retaliate against American assets in the region. And there are all kinds. There's no shortage of bases. There's tens of thousands of American troops in the Persian Gulf alone, in Turkey as well. And many of the bases that house these troops don't have the same kind of layered air defense systems that the Israelis have with their Iron Dome technology and add-ons over the core country. They're also, in the case of a place like Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, much closer to Iran. So the warning time of ballistic missile or drone attack would be much shorter. So you could potentially wipe out most of an installation, maybe kill 1,000 U.S. soldiers, maybe sink some very substantial U.S. naval assets as well. The kind of attack that would require some form of American reprisal, and then we're off to the races, right? Then, like you said, it becomes at least a regional conflict. Now, in that case, Trump doesn't get peace in the Middle East. But what he does have is an actual war, which permits actual war powers for a sitting president. One way to get out of the malaise that he's in right now politically, as you pointed out, the price of eggs is still high.
Mm-hmm.
Tariffs were extraordinarily unpopular, and the policies muddy and messy. People don't understand what the next few months are going to bring for their businesses, for their jobs. The employment is very, very tenuous. You have the Musk humiliation and blow up, right? It's been a very mixed bag, this dynamic activist period for Trump. And he either needs to pull a win so that he's popular enough to keep on going inside the whatever remaining structures of democratic constitutionalism have made it this far, or he needs a crisis serious enough so that he can, in a way that will be palatable to enough of the security establishment, invoke authoritarian powers, martial law. We've already seen him send out the National Guard for domestic.
For nothing, yeah.
For nothing, exactly. So if the country is actually at war with Iran, he can send out the National Guard for, because the pro-Palestinian activists are actually treasonously colluding with America's enemies. This is undermining the war effort, et cetera, et cetera. So in that eventuality, he also gets something that he wants, which I think is it's something that should put us all on edge, because